If you've been to a zoo or a butterfly house, you might have experienced seeing tropical butterflies like these, flying freely and enjoying the warm, humid conditions of the greenhouse. You might not think it's possible, but once you know the conditions the butterflies need, you can make a similar setup at home but on a much smaller scale. Over the course of the next few weeks, we are going to turn this structure into a home for tropical butterflies. We'll show you exactly how we did it, how much everything cost, and lots of ways you can try doing the same at home. This setup is ideal for beginners who want to keep butterflies from May to September and try out the hobby before committing to more expensive heating methods, structures or setups. It's late April, and here we are in the garden with an old wooden greenhouse. So this particular greenhouse is 8 feet wide and 6 feet deep. Whatever structure you're using for the butterfly flight area, it needs to be a minimum of a 6-foot cube, but ideally as large as your garden will allow. It doesn't have to be a wooden greenhouse, aluminium and polycarbonate greenhouses will work just as well, as do polytones, which are considerably cheaper. The first thing to consider is the location of your butterfly house. Ideally you want the structure to be in a position where it gets good sunlight for most of the day, but is also slightly shaded. This will protect the greenhouse from overheating in hot sunny weather, which can happen very easily in small structures. It will also create microclimates in your greenhouse, allowing shade or sun-loving butterflies to move to the conditions that they prefer. Once you have your structure in place, it's time to prepare the flight area. First thing that needs to be done is to seal the structure to keep the butterflies in and the pests out. In this case, we are using a layer of fine netting. It's simply cut to shape and stapled into place. For aluminium greenhouses, you can purchase clips to attach the netting to the frame, and in a polytunnel, the net can be inserted between the cover and the framework. Try to make sure all the edges are taut and neat, as if left loose it's very easy for the butterflies to find their way behind it. You might also wish to add a layer of horticultural bubble wrap before adding the net to improve the insulation in the cooler months. But this is usually not needed if the flight area is only being used for the summer. The netting also allows the butterflies to grip onto the sides of the flight area, and it means you can open the vents when needed to cool the greenhouse down without the butterflies escaping. Next, you need to add some form of secure netting to the door, where you'll be able to carefully enter and exit the greenhouse without any of your butterflies escaping. In this case, we're using a magnetic screen door which remains sealed when not in use. It might also be worth adding an additional flap of netting on the inside as a secondary line of defence. That's the flight area secured. Now let's look at how much everything has cost so far. You'll be able to find links in the description for all the items that we've used in this build. So firstly we have the netting, which was a 2 metre by 10 metre piece for £16.99. Then we have the magnetic screen door, which was £13.99, which brings the total cost so far to £30.98. If you don't have an old structure that you can convert, then obviously the cost will increase. But some quite large polytunnels can be found online for less than £100, so this would be an ideal option. Here we are back in the garden a couple of days later. Now that the flight area is secure, we need to look at how we are going to get the conditions right for the butterflies to survive. There are 3 main factors to consider with butterflies: temperature, humidity, and light levels. So let's look at the temperature first. As a general guide, you should try and keep the flight area 24 to 28 Celsius during the day and 12 to 18 Celsius at night. But having said that, there is quite a lot of flexibility in those numbers. For example, most butterflies are fine with an overnight temperature of 8 to 10 Celsius, but you need to consider that your plants might not be okay with this. And during the day, butterflies will be okay with the temperature dropping to 18 or 20, as well as peaking at 30 or 32, as long as this is just occasionally. So you will need to heat or ventilate the greenhouse at the appropriate times to maintain the temperatures. Next is the humidity. You have to remember that most of these butterflies come from the rainforests and tropical locations, so they will need a high humidity of 60 to 80% at all times, or they can quickly dehydrate and die. Filling your flight area with plants and soil will help to increase the humidity, but you will need to regularly water and spray the flight area and monitor the conditions. And finally, we have the light levels. This factor is just as important for the plants as it is for the butterflies. You need good light levels to keep the nectar plants flowering, as well as to keep the butterflies feeding. If the light levels are too low, then the butterflies won't fly, which in turn means they won't feed. One way to solve this is to increase the temperature a little on dull days, and this will encourage more activity. So let's look at the most basic setup of what is needed to maintain and monitor the conditions. You can find links to all of these items in the video description. Firstly, we have the humidity meter. This one was £6.79 and it's fairly straightforward. At the moment you can see the greenhouse is too dry at around 40% humidity. Then we have the maximum minimum thermometer, which was £9.95. As you can see, it shows the maximum temperature the greenhouse has been, the current temperature of the greenhouse, and the minimum temperature. This is a really important thing to have so you can monitor what's been happening in your greenhouse when you haven't been there. And then you can adjust any heating or venting if you need to. Next we have a simple socket timer, which is £7.49. You simply twist the dial to the correct time and push in the 15-minute segments as needed. This is perfect if you only want to heat the greenhouse at night, or you can have two different heaters on different timers, one running through the night at 15 Celsius and one running through the day at 25. Next we have the heater, which was £44.95. This one is a 2 kilowatt electric heater, which is ideal for a small flight area such as this one. For bigger greenhouses you might need a 3 kilowatt. This particular model operates as a fan when it's not heating, so it provides good air circulation. It also has a 1 kilowatt setting if you want to use a bit less energy or only need a small amount of heat. And finally, a weatherproof box for the electrical plugs and sockets to go in. This one was £13.99. And it's always really important to take care with electrical items in a greenhouse, as you're going to be spraying water, so it can be very dangerous. So now let's get the heater set up. This model doesn't have any temperatures on the dial, so the best thing to do is to turn the heater up to full power, leave it running for 10 minutes and you can see what temperature is reached and what the heater can manage. Then you can simply dial down the heater, bit at a time, until you find the temperature that you want. In this setup, until we get the butterflies, we're going to set the heater at 16 degrees. This will keep the plants warm at night and allow them to establish. Once we get the butterflies, which should be in early June, the overnight temperature should be high enough to not need any additional heating, and we will then set the heater to 24 Celsius and use the timer so that it runs from 9 AM to 6 PM and just heats during the day when the butterflies need it. The next thing you need to check is the back of the heater. This particular model is okay, but some have much more open grills, and these can be very dangerous to the butterflies, causing them to be sucked into the heater. You may need to add an additional layer of wire mesh to the back of the heater if this is the case. So the last thing to do is to place the thermometer and the humidity meter in a shaded position in the flight area. And what we are going to do is monitor that over the coming days and make any adjustments if necessary. So let's look at the total cost of all the items in this episode and see how much we spent so far. You can find the links in the description of all the items that we've used. This brings the total so far to £114. We are back in the garden, and this time we are getting on to one of the more exciting parts, which is the planting. You're going to have two types of plants in your flight area, the nectar plants and the caterpillar food plants. In this episode, we're going to look at the nectar plants. Some butterflies, such as Morpho and Caligo, feed only on rotting fruit, so placing slices of fermenting banana in your flight area will be sufficient, but most butterflies will feed on nectar from flowers. So you need to make sure that there is a good supply of nectar available at all times, so that your butterflies have something to feed on. If you are short on flowers, you can make some colourful feeders like this one. It's made from a scouring pad, a plastic cocktail glass, and then filled with nectar solution. Simply mix 1 part fructose with 9 parts water and fill the feeder. You'll need to rinse and replace this with fresh solution every 2 to 3 days. You can also supplement the nectar with good flowers from the garden and place them in a bottle of water, changing them regularly as they fade. If you are keeping Heliconius butterflies, they need pollen as well as nectar. You can see this heliconid digesting the pollen on its proboscis. If you have plenty of flowers available, then the pollen should be there too. There are 3 key nectar plants that you will find in most butterfly houses. They are Lantana, which is often sold online and in garden centres as a patio plant, usually in late spring or early summer. Then there is Stachytarpheta, or porterweed, which is very occasionally available online as seed. And then Pentas, which is usually red, pink or white in colour, and again you will sometimes find these in garden centres during the summer months. Also make sure that your plants haven't been sprayed or treated with any pesticides, as this can in turn kill the butterflies. So here are the nectar plants that we bought for this setup. Firstly, we have some of the key nectar plants which have been grown on from cuttings, Pentas, 2 taller grown Lantana varieties, and some Stachytarpheta. If you are unable to find these, then there are some more commonly available plants which are okay to use instead. Then we have some Verbena, which is a super useful plant that's really easy to get hold of from any garden centre. These particular ones were 3 trays for £5, and they come in a whole host of different colours. Then we have some Lantana plants. These ones were 12 plugs for £14.99 and have been grown on for a few weeks. And finally we have some plants which aren't the best for nectar, but they will still be useful. Marigolds and some Lobelia. And these were 3 trays for £5. Now let's get all the plants potted up and into the greenhouse. We're using lots of recycled pots to save on costs, and we're just potting them up in some peat-free multi-purpose compost. You can't really add too many nectar plants to the setup, the more the better. And if you're just wanting to fly butterflies and not breed them, then at this point your setup is complete, and you just need to be patient and let things grow. For the meantime, we're going to allow these plants to establish for 3 to 4 weeks before we introduce any butterflies. So let's look at how much we spent this episode and the total so far. That brings the total cost to £139. One very important thing to consider is that the caterpillars will eat a lot, and you're not going to have enough leaf material to rear hundreds of caterpillars unless you live near some of these plants or happen to have them growing in your garden already. So if you are successful at getting your butterflies to lay eggs, then it's best to remove most of these from the plant, and then you can rear a small number of caterpillars all the way through to pupae, rather than allow hundreds of caterpillars to hatch and have them starve to death as you quickly run out of food plant. Each butterfly has its own specific food plants, so if you want to breed a particular species, then you're going to need to research which plant your chosen butterfly will lay its eggs on. For this flight area, we're going to grow a small selection of plants that will allow us to try breeding between 10 and 15 different species. These plants are banana. This one was £5.99 from Dobby's, and it is used by the owl butterflies. or as an alternative, you could choose to grow canna, bird of paradise, heliconia, or ginger. The owl butterflies will feed and lay on all of these plants, but be warned as they do eat a lot of leaf. This plant is probably only enough for 1 or 2 larvae at most. Next up we have Choisia. Now this is used by a lot of the Papilio swallowtails. Again, you could substitute this for citrus plants, skimia or rue, depending on the species you're going to fly, but this will happily grow outside in your garden. Next we have Cestrum, which is used by the Glasswing butterfly. Plants can easily be found online for around £8 to £10. Now we have the passion flower Passiflora cerulea. This is a really useful plant, and it's used by a lot of the Heliconius and Cethosia butterflies. All of the following species will feed on it, including Dryas julia, Heliconius MELPOMENE, Heliconius cheretonius, and Cethosia CYANE. Then we are going to grow a couple of plants from seeds. Firstly, we are going to grow peanuts, which are used by the blue Morpho butterfly, which is known as Morpho HELENOR or Morpho POLYTES. And then we'll be growing some Ipomea, also known as Morning Glory, which is used as the food plant for Hyperluminous Bellina, or the great egg fly. This species will also feed on nettle and bindweed, as well as many other plants. So when it comes to planting these seeds, it's very simple. You just need a pot of multipurpose compost, and then you simply plant around 5 peanuts per pot, and you need to bear in mind that with Morpho species you will need at least 1 peanut plant per larvae, possibly more, because they do eat quite a lot. And for the Ipomea, you can simply sprinkle a few seeds on the surface of the pot and gently push them into the compost. Water them lightly and we can put those to one side and allow them to grow. So that's all the planting complete. Let's have a look at how the flight area looks. Now let's see how much we spent. You can find links in the description to the seeds and plants. This brings the total spend for the setup to £175. Now we have to be patient and wait for the plants to grow. And while we wait, it gives us time to pick and research our butterflies. It's 4 weeks since the greenhouse was planted. So let's see how the plants have developed in that time. So now that our plants are getting established, we can look at the species that we want to try. And we're going to go with 10 different species in this flight area. Firstly we have the blue Morpho, Morpho POLYTES or Morpho HELENOR. This is probably the most famous of all the tropical butterflies. The adults feed only on rotting fruit, so no flowers are needed, and the species originates from Central and South America. The adults only live for 2 to 3 weeks, but in that time they should mate and lay their eggs on peanut plants or mucuna vines. In this case we're going to use the peanuts because they're nice and easy to obtain. The caterpillars eat a lot over a long period of time, usually around 2 months. So make sure you have lots of peanut plants growing, and I would recommend growing at least 1 good sized plant per each individual larvae that you want to rear. Next up we have Cethosia CYANE or the Leopard Lacewing, which is usually found in Thailand and surrounding countries. Males of this species are red and the females are brown. They lay their eggs in batches on passionflower vines, and their red and yellow striped larvae feed together in groups. Next up we have 3 Papilio species from Asia. Papilio POLYTES, the common Mormon, Papilio DEMOLEUS, the lime swallowtail, and Papilio LOWI, the Asian swallowtail. These all have very similar needs, and they originate from Thailand and the Philippines. They feed on nectar from flowers, but they breed extremely easily in a tropical greenhouse, and they will lay their eggs on citrus and choicea plants. Then we have Greta otto, the glasswing butterfly from Central America. These generally prefer more shady conditions and will feed on both fruit and flowers. Eggs are laid singly on the underside of cestrum leaves. Then we have the owl butterfly, Caligo MEMNON. And similar to the Morphos, they only feed on rotting fruit, primarily bananas. They tend to do most of their flying at dusk and dawn, and they will lay their eggs on the leaves of the banana plant. Then we have one of my personal favourites, which is the Postman butterfly, Heliconius MELPOMENE. The adult butterflies feed on nectar from flowers as well as pollen. They are particularly good if your greenhouse is slightly shaded and has low light levels. Eggs are laid on the passionflower vine, and one of the unique traits about the Postman butterfly is that there are lots of different colour forms, and you can mix and breed the different wing patterns together to make new patterns. Then we have the flame butterfly, Dryas julia. This one breeds particularly well in a small greenhouse, again feeding on the passion vine, the same as the Postman and Cethosia. The butterflies themselves feed on nectar from flowers and live for around 3 weeks, but in that time they should mate and lay quite a lot of eggs. And finally, topping off the 10 is Hypoluminous bellina, the great egg fly. Again, this is a very easy species to breed, especially in a sunny greenhouse, and it feeds on a lot of different plants, including morning glory, which is Ipomoea, nettles, bindweed, and a lot of other things. So that's our 10 species that we're going to try. So now that we've chosen our butterflies, where do you buy them from? In most cases, you'll be purchasing butterflies in their pupae or chrysalis form. This is the stage where they can be transported most easily. Butterflies are bred sustainably in captivity in countries such as the Philippines, Thailand, Costa Rica, Belize, Kenya, and many more. The breeding projects in these countries provide an ecologically sound income for locals, and many of the projects use their profits to purchase more land and rainforest. So by purchasing butterflies, you are directly supporting all of these good causes. Every week, shipments of pupae are sent around the globe, directly to butterfly houses, zoos, and pupae distributors. The 2 main UK and European suppliers are the Entomologist and Stratford Butterfly Farm. So let's look at these 2 suppliers and see how things work. The Entomologist publishes its pupae list on a Friday afternoon. You can then place your order by selecting the species you'd like, and the pupae are then shipped out the following Monday or Tuesday. There's no minimum order, but you have to remember that the prices don't include VAT, so you'll need to add an extra 20% to the prices, as well as shipping costs, to work out exactly how much you'll be paying. But you can do this by simply adding the items to your basket. Next we have Stratford Butterfly Farm. Similarly, they also publish their pupae list on a Friday afternoon. Prices are roughly the same as the Entomologist, although possibly a little cheaper on the Philippine species. You ideally need to order straight away, as the pupae sell out fast. There is a minimum order of 50 pupae, and again the VAT situation is the same, where you have to add 20% to the prices, as well as the shipping to see the final price. If you're only going to buy smaller quantities of pupae, such as 5 or 10, then there are some suppliers like Stewart's Butterflies or Worldwide Butterflies. These are generally more expensive per pupa, but there's no minimum order value, and there's no rush to get your order in on a Friday, so they might be better suited to someone just starting out. So how many pupae should you buy? If you're intending to breed a species, then in theory you only need 1 male and 1 female to hatch. But you have to bear in mind that it's not possible for suppliers to send equal numbers of males and females, as it can be very difficult and time consuming to identify them. So you will just end up with a random selection. You'll also find that not all of the pupae will emerge successfully. If you have the conditions correct, and the pupae are of good quality, then you should expect between 7 to 9 pupae out of every 10 to emerge perfectly. But you should be aware that a small number of losses are inevitable. Generally, I would suggest ordering a minimum of 10 pupae of a species that you are trying to breed. But if you are just looking to fly butterflies, then you can purchase as little or as many of a species as you would like. So we went online last week and we placed our order for the pupae. And the box has just arrived. So the pupae have arrived. They will usually be in a polystyrene box or a cardboard box like this one. Make sure you are ready to prepare the pupae for emergence as soon as they arrive. So when we open the box, it will be full of cotton wool, which protects the pupae during shipping. Peel back the cotton and you should find the pupae. As you can see, the pupae are all different shapes and sizes. This one is the pupae of the owl butterfly Caligo MEMNON, the great egg fly Hypoliminus bellina, the lime swallowtail Papilio DEMOLEUS, the leopard lacewing Cethosia CYANE, the flame Dryas julia, the Asian swallowtail Papilio LOWI, the common Mormon Papilio POLYTES, the Postman Heliconius MELPOMENE, the Glasswing Greta, the blue Morpho POLYTES. So now we need to find somewhere to emerge the pupae. If the temperatures in your greenhouse are reasonably stable, then you can set up an emerging area in a shaded corner of the flight area, away from direct sunlight. In this case, we're using a polystyrene box. Place the cotton wool from the pupae delivery in the bottom of the emerging box. We'll cover the cotton wool in the base with some kitchen towel, and once the pupae are added, this can be dampened down. The kitchen towel ensures that any butterflies that might fall don't get caught in the cotton threads. We are then going to pin a microfiber cloth to the top of the emerging box. This is useful for a number of reasons, such as giving the emerging butterfly something to grip, and more importantly, you can hook the pupae directly onto it for emerging. Now let's remove the pupae from the box, making sure to remove any loose threads of cotton that might cause them to get tangled when emerging. If the greenhouse gets too hot, then you might wish to set up an emerging cage in your home, so you can keep a closer eye on the pupae and control the temperatures and humidity. The ideal conditions are a constant temperature of 24 to 26 Celsius and a humidity of 80%. Most pupae will have a silk pad at one end where they were originally attached to the plant. You can simply insert a pin through this and then pin them to the polystyrene box. Where there is no pad, the pupae should hook itself directly onto the microfiber cloth. Sometimes, if the pupae doesn't want to attach, you might need to glue it to a cane or a piece of card and then suspend it, using a glue such as Copydex. If you need more information on this, you can watch our full care guide on caring for and suspending pupae for emergence, which goes into much more detail on the topic. Each species takes a different amount of time, but you should notice the pupae starts to darken after a couple of days, and the wings of the butterfly become visible through the case of the pupae. It's the next morning, and as you can see, one of our Dryas julia butterflies has hatched out overnight. Throughout the next week, you should regularly check the emerging cage for adults. Now it's time to introduce our first butterflies to the greenhouse and see how they like it. Now that the butterflies have settled in, you can spend more time in your greenhouse watching and enjoying them fly around. we'll be taking a look at how to breed the butterflies. For the most part, the butterflies will do this themselves. We've intentionally picked species that are well suited to a greenhouse environment and tend to breed prolifically, so in theory it should be fairly straightforward. Each species is slightly different, but in most cases the adults will hatch and then take a day or two to adjust to conditions, flying and feeding. Let's take a look at the life cycle of a butterfly. In this case, it's the common Mormon, Papilio POLYTES. After 2 or 3 days of flying around, the butterfly should naturally pair, and this will fertilise the female. In the case of the common Mormon, the female will usually lay between 100 and 200 eggs on citrus or Cethosia plants. In this case, the eggs have been laid on Cethosia. The small yellow eggs will begin to hatch into tiny caterpillars, and over the next few weeks these will grow and develop. Papilio POLYTES larvae, in their earlier stages, have the appearance of bird droppings as a way of camouflage. The larvae will get bigger and shed its skin around 5 times in what are called instars. In the final instar, the larvae will look like this. It will then position itself somewhere safe on a stem and begin pupating. After a day or so, it will become a pupae. And then around 12 to 14 days later, this will hatch out into a butterfly and the cycle starts again. So let's have a look at what's happened in the greenhouse over the last 3 weeks. once you've set up your greenhouse, you're going to attract pests and predators. Some will attack the butterflies at their various stages, and others will go after the plants. You won't be able to spray or use any kind of chemicals to deal with these problems, because there is a risk that this will also kill your butterflies, so you have to look for alternative solutions. Your butterflies are very vulnerable to several predators that will find their way into the flight area. Primarily, spiders, ants, slugs and snails are the key issues that you will face. With spiders, there is very little you can do, other than carefully checking around the greenhouse and manually removing them. Even a very small spider can bite and kill one of your butterflies or caterpillars. So it's important to check regularly and make sure there are no obvious gaps around the door or joins in the netting, and remove any that you find. With ants, they will often take larvae and eggs from your plants. One solution I have found is to use this ant stop product. You have to be very careful with it, but if you place it under a plant pot, on the floor, near where you've seen the ants, then there's no risk the butterflies can get at it. Then the ants do eventually find it and it will remove the colony. Slugs and snails can be very problematic. If your butterflies are on the floor overnight, it's very likely they'll be eaten by slugs. And they have also been known to eat eggs and pupae. There are two good solutions that I've previously found. Firstly, using nematodes and watering those on the plants and soil does a good job, but it only works for a few months. Or I have found these organic slug pellets called Ferromax work particularly well and cause no problems for the butterflies even when sprinkled liberally around the flight area. Now on to the plant pests. If you're only keeping the flight area running for the summer, then the first few months tend to be relatively pest free. But over time, pests will begin to appear. Mealybug, aphids, red spider mite, whitefly and thrip are all particularly common issues. Luckily, almost all plant pests have some form of biological control that you can introduce onto your plants and they will take care of the issue. Mealybug can be one of the most difficult pests to get rid of. If you have them, you'll find white sticky masses on your plants. To combat these, you can purchase larvae or adults of Cryptothalamus, a type of ladybird that preys on all stages of the mealybug life cycle. To deal with whitefly, it's best to use a small parasitic wasp called Encarsia famosa. Hang the cards you receive on your plants and the tiny wasps will hatch and lay their eggs in the whitefly pupae and eventually remove the pest from your flight area. Aphids can be very prolific at certain times of the year. Could introduce lacewings or ladybirds, but I've found these also eat eggs or larvae of your butterflies. A good alternative is a mixture of parasitic wasps commonly sold as Aphis Scout. This includes 5 different types of aphid predator, which will deal with whatever aphid species you happen to have in your greenhouse. Finally, thrip and red spider mite are other common issues you might encounter. Both of these have foil sachets of Amblyceus mites that you can hang on your plants to remove them. You can find links in the video description of all the suggested biological controls, but you may only need these if you have a particularly bad infestation or plan to keep the greenhouse running for a longer period of time. So here we are, 2 months in starting the project, and this is how it looks. The setup of the flight area came to £175 in total, which is quite good value when compared to the outlay required for a lot of other hobbies. So let's take a look through the species we've included in the flight area and see how each of them has performed. So first we have the Flame Dryas Julia. We purchased 10 pupae of these at £2.34 each, and 8 of those 10 pupae emerged perfectly. As you saw, we had lots of pairings, lots of eggs, and ultimately a lot of larvae, so these are a really good starting species, particularly with a small flight area such as this. Then we had Cethosia CYANE, the Leopard Lacewing. Purchased 10 of these at £1.50 each, and 9 of those 10 pupae emerged perfectly. There was 4 pairings in just one day on one occasion, and there was dozens of egg batches from them. So as long as you have a bright sunny greenhouse, then this is certainly a good species to try. Then we have the Great Egg Fly, Hyperliminus bellina. Purchased 10 pupae of these at £1.32 each. 7 of the 10 emerged perfectly, which isn't too bad. These also paired really easily, but we did find that they preferred to lay most of their eggs on the nettles rather than the ipomea that was provided, so you might wish to go for nettles instead. Then we have Morpho HELENOR, the blue Morpho. These cost £3.12 each, and we had 9 out of the 10 emerge perfectly. Considering they are quite a large butterfly, they flew really well in the greenhouse, and fertile eggs were laid on the peanut plants. They do lay more prolifically on vines such as mucuna, but it is perfectly possible to breed and rear them with just the peanut available. Then we have the Papilios, which is POLYTES and DEMOLEUS. These cost £1.32 each, and we had 8 of the 10 POLYTES hatch, and 7 of the 10 DEMOLEUS. Papilio LOWI alongside those was £1.80 per pupae, and 9 out of the 10 of those emerged perfectly. All of the Papilios paired really easily. We had a lot of eggs on the Cethosia stems, so again these are definitely some species that would be super useful if you're just starting out. Then we have the owl butterfly, Caligo MEMNON. These were £2.76 each, and we had 7 out of the 10 pupae hatched perfectly. Now this is the only species where we were unsuccessful at getting pairings or eggs, but usually these are quite an easy species to breed. But it can depend on a lot of different factors, some of them including exactly where these pupae have come from, maybe they need slightly different conditions to normal, or maybe we were just unlucky. But it is still definitely one of those iconic butterflies that are really nice to try in your greenhouse and see what happens. Then we have the Postman, Heliconius MELPOMENE. These were £3 each, but were supplied as live adults, so they didn't have to be hatched. Pairings and egg laying was witnessed, but one thing to watch out for is if you keep several species of Heliconius together, such as Dryas Julia, zebras, and Postman butterflies, then the more prolific species will generally suppress the others, so it's one thing to watch out for. Finally, we have the Glasswings. These were £4 each, and again supplied as live adults. Lots of eggs were laid on the cestrum, and we had some larvae that went all the way through to pupae and again hatched out. These particularly enjoyed the lower sections of the greenhouse, living in the shade most of the time, but they did really well, and it's one species where they require a lot less heat, but at much higher humidity. So if you have a very shaded greenhouse, these would be perfect. So in summary, to get 9 out of the 10 species to breed on the first attempt is really quite good, and it shows what can be achieved in a small space on a tight budget. The only major problem that we did have with the greenhouse was controlling the temperature, particularly in terms of it overheating. Opening the door, as well as the vents, was one easy way to solve this. But you may need to put some shading over the greenhouse or carry out additional watering to bring the temperature down. You could also add some fans to draw in cool air and remove the warm air, and that would work really well too. So that's it for this project. I hope that it has encouraged some of you to have a go at trying this at home. It doesn't have to cost a fortune to keep butterflies, as long as you are careful to get the conditions right so your butterflies are happy. Then you should have lots of success with them. If there are any other aspects of keeping tropical butterflies that you'd like us to cover, then feel free to leave a comment below. And I'll see you in another video.